Most women believe they need to be louder to be heard, but the rare woman who chooses silence over noise, absence over reaction, stillness over drama, she becomes unforgettable. She does not beg, she does not explain, she simply disappears, and in doing so she leaves an echo in the male psyche that no new voice can drown out. Some women, consciously or not, awaken something primal in a man, not just desire, but remembrance. A remembrance of something sacred he has long forgotten, the anima, the feminine force buried within his unconscious. But when that woman withdraws, when she vanishes without warning or closure, it's not just her presence he misses, it's the mirror she once held up to his soul. You must understand, most men do not fall in love with the woman, they fall in love with what she reflects back to them, their own potential, their own longing, their lost innocence. She is the projection screen for his unlived emotions, his unintegrated shadow, his maternal hunger, his buried regret. When she goes silent, when she disappears without a trace, the movie ends, but the emotions keep playing. This is not merely romantic loss, this is psychological rupture. And the more unconscious he is, the louder her silence becomes. Her silence is not passive, it is an active force. It stirs the shadows, it brings the buried to the surface, it confronts the ego's illusions that he is in control, that she was replaceable, that her presence was a given. In silence, the feminine reveals her greatest weapon, the ability to be everything and then nothing. A spiritual vanishing act that leaves behind only questions that no other woman seems able to answer. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the anima, the feminine inner figure that lives inside every man's unconscious. Most men are strangers to her. They meet her for the first time in the eyes of a woman who does not try to please, does not try to impress, does not need him to validate her existence. She is not soft in the way the world expects. Her softness is forged in fire. The softness of a woman who knows how to walk away, not because she doesn't feel, but because she feels deeply and still chooses herself. It is in her silence that he begins to feel the full weight of his own emptiness. It is in her absence that he finally notices the noise of his own mind, the regret, the fantasy, the guilt, the confusion. She is gone, and yet she is everywhere, in the curve of a stranger's smile, in a scent that catches him off guard, in the silence between his own thoughts. She has become the ghost of his psyche, not to haunt, but to awaken. And yet most men will not admit this. Pride resists confession. The ego would rather chase distractions, new conquests, louder voices, anything to avoid the quiet truth. She mattered more than he was willing to admit, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't, not because of what she gave, but because of what she withheld. He remembers her stillness, her gaze that didn't beg, the way she listened without interrupting, as though hearing something in him even he couldn't name. And now, in her absence, he realizes he wasn't being studied. He was being seen, truly seen. And now, without her gaze, he is invisible again, even to himself. Silence, in feminine hands, becomes initiation. She was never playing games. She was never punishing him. She was simply done explaining herself to someone unwilling to hear her the first time. And the final act of power was not yelling, not closure, not chaos, but silence. And now he is left with the noise of his own projections, the unintegrated parts of himself she once carried, now returning like orphans to his inner world. This is the moment the masculine is invited to descend, not into despair, but into the underworld of his own soul. This is where shadow work begins. Her silence becomes the mirror, and in that mirror he sees himself. Not the version he projected, but the truth he's avoided. The boy still craving a mother, the man still confusing attention with love, the human still terrified of being truly known. He cannot forget her, because he never really knew her. He only knew his version of her, shaped by fantasy, hunger and denial. But now, in her silence, the real woman emerges, the one who never needed him, the one who held space without submission, the one who, by walking away, taught him the difference between possession and presence. And maybe, just maybe, this is what she came for. not to stay, not to heal him, not to teach through words, but to leave in a way that breaks open everything false. The anima is not here to coddle the ego, she is here to shatter it. But the man does not shatter all at once. First comes denial, a cold, rational dismissal of what cannot be fully grasped. She was dramatic, too sensitive, she overreacted. This is the ego's last line of defense, to reduce the sacred to the ordinary, to protect itself from the unbearable truth that her absence hurts in places he didn't know existed. What he doesn't realize, not yet, is that her silence was not an end, but a mirror, one that he refused to look into when she was still speaking. When she loved him aloud, he could ignore it. When she offered understanding, he mistook it for weakness. But when she vanished, it was as if all the lights went out in a room he thought he controlled. Now, in the darkness, he begins to feel what he never had the courage to face, the depth of his dependence on her presence, not for affection, but for meaning. Her energy was not just company, it was confirmation. Confirmation that he was desirable, worthy, important. She became his emotional mirror, and when she removed it, he no longer knew what he looked like. His is the spiritual violence of feminine silence. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't explain why it left. It simply removes the energy that made a man feel alive, and in that void he meets the barren reality of his own soul. Jung warned of this. The catastrophe that occurs when a man remains unconscious of his anima. The inner feminine becomes projected outward, often onto women he desires but cannot understand. And when they leave, he feels betrayed not just by them, but by a deeper part of himself, because in truth he was never just chasing her, he was chasing the lost parts of himself that she awakened. The most dangerous women are not those who seduce the body, they are the ones who stir the unconscious, the ones who speak to the parts of a man that have been silent his whole life, the part that longs to be held without needing to prove, the part that wants to be accepted in full complexity, the part that yearns to surrender to something larger than control. And when such a woman walks away, when she chooses her peace over persuasion, the man is left with a profound sense of absence, not just of her, but of himself. It is in this gap that the real journey begins. The ancient Stoics understood this, that suffering is not punishment but purification. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But for the modern man, power has often been mistaken for possession. Strength has been confused with control. So when he loses her, he does not just grieve her departure, he grieves the illusion that he ever had control. He grieves the boyhood belief that love could be maintained without effort, that presence could be earned without presence in return, and perhaps for the first time he realizes he was not abandoned, he was unwilling to awaken, and she stopped waiting. In the feminine silence there is a test, not of love, but of evolution. Will he chase distraction, or will he confront the hollowness within? Will he blame her or begin the sacred work of reclaiming the fragmented parts of his psyche she once carried for him? This is where the work begins, not with her return, but with her refusal. She does not explain her silence because she no longer needs to. The woman who once softened her truth to protect his ego has grown past the need to be understood. She now understands herself, and that understanding cost her everything. Her illusions, her romantic fantasies, her desire to fix broken men by loving them harder. She learned that no amount of presence can teach a man what only absence can reveal, and so she disappeared, not to wound him, to free herself. She let him sit in the silence she once sat in while he offered crumbs and called it love, the same silence she endured while doubting her worth, waiting for him to see her clearly, hoping he would one day rise to meet her in the place of truth. But he didn't, and so she walked away, not out of anger, but clarity. Clarity that her love was not a currency to be spent in hope of being chosen. Clarity that she was never asking for too much, only offering herself to someone not yet capable of receiving. And now, from the distance, he begins to feel it, the echo, not of her voice, but of her essence. She is everywhere, in the stillness between conversations, in the depth of night when distractions fail, in the moments where his new pursuits feel hollow because he is no longer haunted by her presence, but by her absence. And this is the threshold. where a man either spirals into blame or rises into accountability. But rising requires more than remorse. It demands descent, a descent into the underworld of the self, where the shadow dwells, where unhealed wounds fester beneath layers of charm, control, and denial. Carl Jung knew this intimately. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And for the man left in the aftermath of her silence, this darkness is now unavoidable, because what she withdrew was never just attention, it was reflection. Her presence once gave structure to his chaos, softness to his hardness, meaning to his movement. But now, all that remains is the raw terrain of his inner world, no longer masked by her affection, and there is no map for this kind of journey. This is the moment when many men recoil, not from her, but from themselves. They reach out to new women, hoping to replace the reflection, to recreate the illusion. They perform, pursue, impress, but deep down the performances feel empty, the conversations feel shallow, and the women, no matter how beautiful or available, don't touch him in the same way. Because the wound isn't romantic, it's archetypal. It's the wound of having glimpsed something sacred and then losing it. She wasn't perfect. No, she had her flaws, her moments of fury, her silent battles, but she was real. Her eyes carried storms. Her voice carried prophecy. Her energy didn't just soothe, it shook. She didn't flatter his ego, she exposed it. She didn't fall for his performance. She stared into the spaces where the masks slip, and yet he mistook her depth. The woman who walks away without words leaves behind a different kind of devastation, not the chaos of conflict, but the weight of unspoken truth. Her silence does not scream, it lingers, it haunts, because it reveals the one thing the ego cannot bear, that she didn't need to be understood to be powerful. She didn't need to be loved to be whole. She didn't need to be chosen to be enough. And that truth threatens everything he was taught about power, love, and identity. This is where the masculine either breaks or begins, where he either numbs, denies, and repeats, or sits with the raw discomfort of self-confrontation. The silence becomes a crucible, and within it, something begins to stir. First, pain, then memory, then humility. The kind of humility that doesn't grovel, but reflects, the kind that looks back and sees clearly what was once blurred by entitlement. He remembers how she loved, how she stayed, long after her needs were unmet, how she offered her softness as a gift, not a weakness, how she opened herself again and again in hope that he might one day meet her where she lived, in depth, in soul, in truth, but he never arrived, and now she's gone. This is the inner reckoning. The moment when the man must decide who he will become in the absence of the woman who once saw him before he saw himself. If he is brave, he begins the descent into the father wounds, into the mother hunger, into the trauma responses disguised as independence, into the parts of himself he buried so long ago he forgot they were even his. And it is here, in the ache of her absence, that he finally hears her, not her voice, but her impact. Because silence, when wielded by the feminine, becomes a teacher, a mystic, a mirror. It reveals not what she lacked, but what he refused to see. Until now, and still, he can't stop remembering. The way she entered Orson, room like a shift in temperature. The way her silence wasn't emptiness, but a presence too sacred for words. The way she didn't chase when he withdrew, but observed like a woman who had learned long ago that losing a man is never as costly as losing herself. Her silence taught him more than her words ever could. That love is not earned through performance, that presence cannot be faked, that some women do not return, not because they are cruel, but because they are done. Done being mirrors for men who refuse to look. Done being therapists in lovers' clothing, done carrying the emotional weight of two people, done explaining the difference between connection and convenience, and so she vanished. And still he hears her, in the pause before a reply, in the ache of a quiet night, in the mirror that no longer flatters. She became the silence he could not silence, and still he doesn't speak of her, not to his friends, not to the new women he entertains, not even to himself. In the privacy of thought, He tells the world he's moved on, that he's fine, that life goes on. But beneath that polished surface, in the quiet chambers of his psyche, she lingers like a sacred wound, not bleeding, but burning, not healing, but transforming, because the truth is, he never truly met her. He met a version of her he could manage, a version he could predict, control, or keep at a distance. The real her, the soul-lit, chaos-bearing, boundary-honoring, mirror-wielding woman, she was too much, too vast, too untamed, and so he minimized her in his mind. He folded her into the neat boxes of difficult, emotional, high maintenance. But now, with time as the great revealer, he sees that those labels were not hers, they were his limitations, dressed up as judgment, and so she remains, not in body, but in echoes. This is what many will never understand. Feminine silence is not withdrawal. It is alchemical. It is the final act of self-respect, the softest kind of rebellion. A woman doesn't vanish because she has nothing to say. She vanishes because she said it all, with her words, her patience, her tears, her time. And when that language failed, she let silence speak the rest. He hears her now because he never really listened when she was present. The messages come like whispers in moments of stillness, when he tries to rest, when he stops chasing, when the noise of the world fades just long enough for the truth to seep in. You never truly saw her. You thought love meant comfort, not confrontation. You mistook her silence as a weakness, but it was her final power. This is how feminine energy transforms the masculine, not by molding him, not by fixing him, but by leaving him with himself. Because no woman can do the shadow work for him. No woman can walk into his underworld and retrieve the pieces of his broken self. That is a task only he can accept. But the feminine can be the invitation. And sometimes that invitation arrives in the form of silence that cannot be ignored. And if he's ready, truly ready, he doesn't just mourn her. He meets her again, this time within. He begins to notice the anima, not as fantasy, but as teacher. He stops chasing women who mimic her light and begins to cultivate that light within himself. Depth, presence, intuition, stillness. He no longer seeks her to feel whole. He seeks to become whole, and maybe then, should their paths ever cross again, he could finally meet her soul to soul, not ego to ego. But perhaps he never sees her again, and perhaps that's the point. Because she wasn't a detour on his journey, she was the initiator, the one who burned the bridge not in bitterness but in blessing. She did not leave him with she left him with awakening. And for her, too, the silence is not empty. It is sanctuary. For the woman who walks away like that does not do so lightly. She has weighed the cost of her peace against the convenience of staying. She has wrestled with guilt, with grief, with the ache of being invisible to the one she held closest. But in the end, she chooses the higher cost, to be alone with her truth rather than partnered with her suppression. She understands what many never will, that being loved without being seen is not love, that being chosen by someone who cannot meet her depth is not a victory, that waiting for a man to awaken is not devotion, it's delay. So she walks, not away from him, but toward herself, and in doing so, she becomes untouchable, because she no longer needs to be heard to feel whole. She no longer needs to be chased to feel wanted. She no longer needs to be validated by someone who couldn't even sit in her presence without squinting at her light. Her silence is not absence, it is elevation, and from that height she watches him, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with the serene detachment of a woman who knows what she offered and what he lost. Not just her body, not just her loyalty, but the rarest thing a man can ever be given, the chance to truly meet himself through the reflection of a conscious woman. And now he must go alone, not because she punished him, but because she freed him. And so he walks, not in pride, not in conquest, but in quiet unrest, because something in him has changed irrevocably. What used to satisfy now leaves a strange aftertaste. What once excited him now feels dull and repetitive. The same games, the same shallow praise, the same loop of charm and detachment. It all begins to feel like a performance for an audience that no longer matters. She took nothing with her when she left, except meaning that was always her power. Not in what she said, not even in what she did, but in what she meant. Her presence meant something. Her words meant something. Her silences most of all meant something. And now in a world that keeps shouting for attention, her absence becomes a deeper kind of presence, the kind that lingers. This is the paradox of feminine energy in its highest form. It cannot be possessed, only met, and if it is not met, it will not wait. She once offered herself with open hands, not to be taken, but to be received, and when he could not, or would not, she did not scream, she did not beg. She simply closed her palms, not to punish but to protect, because when a woman reaches a certain level of consciousness, she no longer offers her soul to those who cannot sit with their own. He still thinks of her, not in loud moments but in the subtle spaces, in the mornings when the silence feels heavy, in the middle of the night when sleep is shallow, in the eyes of a stranger who reminds him for a second of something she once said, something that didn't matter then, but somehow echoes now. She became a myth. Not the fantasy kind, but the archetypal kind, the woman who awakens and leaves, the anima who initiates but does not rescue, the guide whose only map is disappearance. And this is where Jung's wisdom meets Stoic truth. Because the Stoics too understood that the deepest suffering is not external, it is internal dissonance, the space between who we are and who we could be, between what we say and what we feel, between what we lose and what we realize we never truly appreciated. Epictetus once said, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." And now, in the hollow that she left behind, the man begins to confront his judgments, not of her, but of himself. How he judged her depth as too much, how he judged her stillness as cold, how he judged her boundaries as walls, how he judged her departure as abandonment, instead of the liberation it truly was. Because when the anima leaves, she doesn't just walk away, she removes the scaffolding holding up a man's illusions, and now he stands in the rubble, not of her destruction, but of his own denial. This is the sacred grief no one talks about, not heartbreak, initiation. It is not the pain of losing a lover, it is the agony of realizing you were never truly present with her when she was right in front of you. And now, when he tries to return, if he ever does, he finds something strange has happened. She's no longer there. Not just physically, but energetically. She no longer occupies the same space. She no longer waits in the same dimension, because the woman who leaves like that doesn't just vanish from his life, she transcends it. And not because she's bitter or superior or heartless, but because she's free. Free from the weight of needing to be chosen. Free from the ache of trying to be heard. Free from the illusion that her love must always endure. She has reclaimed herself piece by piece from every man who could not hold her, and every version of herself that believed she had to shrink to be loved. And now she is unrecognizable, not to the world, but to the man who once knew her only through his projections. He looks for her now in other women, but what he finds is only approximation, shadow, echo, a slight resemblance in voice or posture or mind, but never the same presence, never the same silence, because her silence wasn't empty, it was full of answers he was not ready to hear, full of love he didn't know how to receive, full of wisdom that threatened his comfort. And now that she is gone, he finally understands. She never stopped speaking, he just stopped listening. Long before she went quiet, he stopped listening when her eyes began to dim, when her warmth turned inward, when her touch no longer reached for him out of habit but paused with sacred discretion. He noticed it, the shift, but he thought it would pass, like all the other moments when she bent herself back into softness for the sake of keeping the peace. But this time, she didn't bend. She broke, silently, invisibly, and without permission. Because when a woman like that begins to vanish, it doesn't happen all at once. It's not a dramatic exit or a door slammed shut. No, it begins in the small moments. The way she stops explaining herself, the way she withdraws her laughter from shallow conversations, the way she no longer reaches for his hand in the dark. He tells himself it's just a phase, that she'll come back to him when she calms down. But she's not angry, she's done. And done is a language that speaks quietly, but carries the force of 1,000 unspoken truths. The tragedy is not that she left. The tragedy is that he didn't see her slipping. She gave warnings, not in words but in withdrawal. She gave chances, not in ultimatums but in silence. She gave him everything, and then nothing. And when that nothing came, it felt like a theft, but it wasn't theft. it was reclamation. The moment a woman withdraws her emotional presence, the man is left with his own emptiness, and for many, that is unbearable, because without her mirroring, without her emotional labor, without her sacred holding of his mess, he is left face to face with the unintegrated fragments of self he's always outsourced to her. And yet, she does not hate him. That's the part that confuses him the most. She's not angry, she's not spiteful, she's not bitter, she's just gone. And now he must ask himself, what was I without her energy holding me together? Jung called this the process of individuation. Thus, a painful journey of confronting the shadow and integrating all that has been denied, rejected, or projected onto others. And for the man abandoned by the silence of the feminine, this is the threshold, because her departure is not just a loss, it is an initiation into depth, into discomfort, into maturity. It is the unraveling of the boy who thought love meant someone staying no matter how little he showed up, and the birth of the man who now realizes that presence is not a gift, it's a responsibility. Her silence taught him this, that real connection does not survive in half-presence, that a woman will not eternally carry both the love and the effort, that sacred feminine energy is not infinite in tolerance, it is finite in patience and exact in its discernment. And when it chooses to leave, it does not leave behind explanations, it leaves behind consequences. So he walks now, not in search of her, but in search of what he abandoned in himself, because she was not just his mirror, she was his map. She pointed to the parts of him that were asleep, afraid, guarded, and immature, and when she vanished, she took the map with her and left him the terrain. This terrain is brutal. It requires that he stop blaming, that he stop chasing, that he stop pretending that love is something that happens to him rather than through him. And if he does the work, not to win her back, but to become someone he himself can finally respect, he begins to understand something she always knew, that love is not given to the loudest voice, it is given to the quietest presence. That intimacy is not built in performance, it is built in presence, in truth, in conscious effort. That a woman's silence is not the end, it's the test, the final threshold between ego and evolution. And not every man passes, because not every man is willing to listen after the feminine goes quiet. Not every man is willing to let her absence be the fire that burns down the false self, because she was not just a woman. She was the turning point, the moment everything false cracked and everything real began. She vanished into silence, but in that silence she became a force, wild and unyielding, like the sea pulling back before a storm, leaving the shore exposed and trembling. For the man who loved her, this absence was a reckoning, not a punishment, but a summons to the depths of his own being, where the shadows lurk and the ego trembles. He came face to face with the parts of himself he had long avoided, the selfishness, the fear, the need to control, the hollow craving for validation. She had reflected these shadows back to him not as condemnation, but as invitations to awaken, and when she withdrew, the mirror cracked, leaving him to confront the fractured pieces alone. In that solitude, the rawness of his own soul was laid bare. The silence she left behind was not emptiness, but a sacred space, a void pregnant with possibility. It beckoned him to do what she had already done, to descend into himself, to wrestle with his shadow, to reclaim his lost part. The masculine and feminine are eternally entwined in this dance of disappearance and return, withdrawal and pursuit, silence and speech. When she vanished, she did not close the door forever. She opened it to a new realm, one where he must learn to listen with more than ears, to see with more than eyes, and to love with more than desire. This is the alchemy of transformation, the fire that burns away the ego's illusions and leaves behind only essence. The pain of her absence becomes the catalyst for his individuation, the sacred unfolding of the man beneath the mask, and in time, he will realize that the silence was never hers alone to bear. It was the language of the soul, calling him to rise beyond old patterns, beyond the need to chase, beyond the illusion of control. She vanished. Yes, but what remains is a truth deeper than words, that the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses